Thank you all for joining us. Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for state senator from the 49th Legislative District. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor at the Columbian, and I'll let Craig introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the Columbian's editor and a member of the editorial board.
And then Callie, you're on mute.
Not the first time, won't be the last. I'm Callie Hare. I cover politics for the Columbian. I'll be watching and recording this meeting, but I won't be participating.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to the candidates. Please take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves, explain, give a short background, explain why you were running. After that, we'll move on to specific policy questions. And I should mention, as we mentioned earlier, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And with that, I think we'll get going. We'll start with Annette.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the Columbian for this opportunity today. I'll share a bit about myself. If you recall, I was raised here in this community. I've spent the majority of my 38-year career working here in this community in public policy. It's been over a decade at that time to U.S. Senator Brock Adams and U.S. Senator Pat Murray. I've also served as Government Affairs Director for the American Cancer Society, as well as worked in affairs for our Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce. Most recently, I spent the last 14 years working in federal healthcare for Legacy Health. And given the nearly 4 decades of work experience and nearly 6 decades of living here in this community, I've developed strong relationships locally, at the state level, and federally as well. They're built on respect, on trust. That's allowed me also a strong knowledge and understanding of local, state, and federal government. And it's really this understanding, this experience that allow me to be an effective advocate for this community. It's also why my colleagues in the Senate elected 3 years ago to chair the Senate Healthcare Committee and help lead our state's agenda on healthcare. Now more than ever, in the face of the coronavirus pandemic, we need is consistent leadership, and particularly some healthcare policy expertise that values science and data. And I utilized every aspect of my decades of experience and background and knowledge to be a strong champion for this community. And I consider it a true privilege to serve.
Great, thank you. And before we move on to Ray, I should mention my connection isn't great here, so you might go in and out a little bit. So if I ask you to repeat something, that's why I apologize in advance. We're all trying to do the best we can under trying circumstances.
Boy,
Ray, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Craig. I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to be a part of this. This is a great honor for me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for hosting this. And tell everybody a little bit about me. My name is Rey Reynolds. I am running for the 49th seat. Up in South Chicago. I'm one of 9 children. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a Bachelor in Science in Water Resources and Fish Management. I've been with my wife, Kathy, for about 28 years. Raised 6 of our children right here in Vancouver. Of those kids, I've got 4 of my boys are in the military. I've got 1 airman, I've got 2 Marines, and I've got 1 soldier. They're all inside. I have 1 other son who is intellectually disabled. I have a daughter who's going to be a nurse, and I'm very happy about that. We're doing quite well. I spent 12 years protecting our environment with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, where I acted in some capacities as a game warden. I've also been a fisheries biologist. I'm currently a peace officer here in Vancouver, and I've been here for about 23 years. And my entire career, I've been a union member. I'm deeply involved with the Vancouver community. We honor veterans. We're housing the homeless. We're protecting families against supporting our military. And we're honoring high school students who have heroically volunteered their service into the armed forces. I have privilege of actually honoring a bunch of kids, and my boy was actually came walking up, and I was able to honor him as he entered the service. It was fantastic. And also I ran a nonprofit where we developed processes where we helped women who were caught up in abusive relationships. We developed systems so that they could be safe. Developed projects that involve our faith communities. We help the community to solve problems. Developing emergency triage protocols, all in cases of emergency. These are the things that we did. I was also had the privilege of with NAACP in the past, where we were part of a rites of passage for young men and women of color, and that we were able to bring those kids to a very high state. We showed them the environment. We took them out to different places. They helped clean up trails. They helped to understand the relationship between the ecology and our society. They learned conservation methods. It was outstanding. I've also worked with our Hispanic and Latino community. We've done a lot of good work with doing some mentoring programs that we had at some of the high schools. I was a school resource officer there for about 15 of my years in the police department. And it's a very fantastic time working with these kids and mentoring them. I just want to say that right now is the best time for us, especially time for me, because I'm the right person for such a time as this, because I can bridge that divide right now between race and police reform, as well as being qualified to make laws concerning our environment. I'm thank you all for listening. I know it's going to be a little bit tedious, but thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to you voting for me and putting me into the Senate seat 49.
Great. Thank you. And again, thanks to both of you for joining us. Let's start out with obviously big issue facing the legislature is going to be the pandemic. How should the legislature respond? What should we do regarding the budget? And we'll start with Rey.
Well, see, that is an absolute huge question, and there's a lot of things involved in it. So let's start off with the first things that we have to talk about. We're asking, what can the legislature do? Well, right now, the legislature can't do anything because they have not been brought back into session. And that's unfortunate. It should not be that way. Having said that, to say that the initial shutting down of the order was, it helped get control over the spread, and it gave us time to understand the nature of this virus and what was the right thing to do. Now that we have enough equipment, we have hospitals that are ready to go. We have equipment to handle the outbreak. We have increasing survival rates. I think we need to be moving forward right now. If the legislature had been called, I think we would be moving quickly to open up our state, especially the 49. You know, as an officer, I've done everything to be dealing with the unhoused, the mental health issues, the suicide. I've noticed that there is an increased amount of suicide, increased amount of homelessness. You can go out, if anyone goes in the streets right now, if you go out towards 12th and Lincoln, you'll see all the homeless people camping on the street. This is increasing at an unacceptable rate. More people are suffering from this shutdown than the actual illness itself. We know through the CDC that the survival rates for the highest risk group are over 99%. What can the legislature do? Again, nothing, because the governor has immobilized us. He's not taking any input from the people's representatives. That's the senators and the representatives of the state of Washington. Right now, we have no voice, which I find absolutely unacceptable. Right now, we have bureaucrats that are making mandates through the WAC, the Washington Administrative Code, that have the effect of law without oversight of our legislatures. I think it's a severe civil rights issue. And I don't feel like we've had this kind of violation of civil rights almost since the days of slavery. I think that's outrageous. We need to have the legislature get back in. We need to open up our economy, and we need to create laws to reduce the power of the governor so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Right, and let me move on with that. Annette, what are your thoughts about that part of the pandemic? Has
Yeah,
the governor overstepped his bounds? Should the legislature have been called?
uh, I do not believe the governor stepped his bounds. And let me start by saying that our first priority must be the safety of the citizens of the state. We have to take steps to limit the virus spread, to limit the number of deaths, and more importantly, to also maintain hospital capacity, which I think people tend to forget about. That if we allow our healthcare system to become overwhelmed by those who are suffering with the COVID virus, there will not be capacity to care for any other patients, whether they're heart attack victims or stroke victims or what have you. So we have to keep in mind as well. I'm going to correct a mistaken belief that my opponent just shared. The legislature has been addressing this issue, and we began before the legislative session this year ever ended. And we began actually prior to that. It's been over the last 3 years that I've been in charge in the Senate that we've delivered budgets, and we've delivered those budgets with adequate reserves in our budget stabilization account. And I also want to note that prior to the pandemic, for the first time in our state's history, we received a AAA rating from Moody's. So it was really the strong financial position that allowed us to respond swiftly to the pandemic threat that we recognized in March while we were still in Olympia. As a result, we passed a bipartisan COVID response bill. We appropriated $200 million toward efforts to respond. In addition to that, the governor took action before we ever left Olympia to $450 million in spending proactively within the budget that we passed and sent to him because there was recognition that this pandemic was going to impact everyone.
With that being said, is a special session necessary, or has it been necessary between then and now?
It has not been necessary, and I know that I differ with the Columbian in this perspective, but I'll share that I felt that because we had put resources in place to respond to the initial wave of the pandemic, and due to the fact that so many families, individuals, businesses were facing uncertainty and instability, we wanted to ensure that we retained just as much consistency and stability as we possibly could. And that meant not taking a knee-jerk reaction, slashing budgets, and then leaving folks to also be in worse shape than they are already. So I support the balanced approach that we've taken, and I'm going to continue to do so.
Now, along those lines, Rey, she mentioned the budget looking ahead. The latest forecast is that we're facing a $4.5 billion shortfall between now and mid 2023. Would you be in favor of increasing revenue or cutting spending? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, thank you, Greg, for that. I wanted to address real quickly her, and then I'll get to that statement. The talk about we're limiting deaths, of course, that's what we're doing. We want to limit deaths. That's the whole important thing about this. Also, insofar as our capacity in our hospitals, I've been out there on the streets where we are dealing with issues related to COVID, and noticing that a lot of our hospitals have actually been laying people off because they overstaffed, and some people have been put on furlough. So the point I'm making is we do have hospital capacity at this time, and we can sustain if we do have a spike, we can respond to it. I'm going to get into state finances. Your question about, since we do have a $4.5 billion shortfall, where are we at? Well, would I be making cuts? The question is yes. What do we think first? What I always consider is when we're making cuts, I always ask myself, who does it hurt most? There have been over a dozen legislative tax hikes in the last year, not including city taxes as well. People are out of work, over 1 million lost jobs here in the state during this COVID shutdown. $4.5 billion shortfall. We need to open the economy to get revenue going. Streamline services. We need to delay the spending for new projects. This whole biennial budget since the 2016-2017 biennial budget is almost doubled. Let's look at our spending and then retrofit the programs according to our spending. Look at all the new programs that have been established since that 2016-2017 budget. Look at those new programs, and then let's cut back to those levels.
So specifically, which programs would get cut under that?
Well, that's the whole point. Is you can't just go with what specific programs we're going to look at. We want to look at not across the board cuts, absolutely not. We want to look at programmatic cuts, where we can look at each program and have each of the programs start to say, well, this is what we need. But we need our legislature to actually do that, to start to develop those the programmatic budgeting that we need. And then look at each program, because there's thousands of programs that need to be looked at. And all those programs need to be looked at from the bottom up, what's more important, all the way back to the 2016-2017 biennial.
And for you personally, what would you say are the least important? What should be the first ones cut?
I believe the first things that need to be cut right away are these new programs that have been established since the 2016-2017 biennial. We had education was covered, we had transportation covered, we had our capital budget was covered during those times. And now we've added that. We're looking at spending that's almost at 78% over the above wages we're getting right now. It's outrageous. We can't have that. Each program needs to be looked at line by line, and we need to cut until we are back to that 2016-2017 budget level.
And if it were solely up to you, which programs would you cut?
I hear what you're saying. If it was solely up to me, I would look programmatically. I would start looking at programs that perhaps looking at our Department of Ecology, or looking at our Department of Fish and Wildlife, looking at different departments and also some other departments that have to do with maybe our IT program. I would be looking at those, but see, those are just programs we're looking at. I'm saying very specifically that we need to not only just look at those specific programs, we need to look at all programs and look at where we can programmatically lower those budgets to the 2016-2017 levels. We can't just simply go, well, this is the program I want and that, because then it seems almost as if you're targeting. No, we need to look at it all.
Annette, how would you address it?
Well, as I said, I support a balanced, measured approach. As you well know, last month's state revenue forecast showed improvement. We could well continue to see improvement in the future. We expect another forecast in November. That's the forecast that we'll be budgeting from going forward. I don't believe that we should rush to rebuild the status quo, because that's what we know and what we're most comfortable with. We have made cuts, as I've already shared. We're looking now at exemptions and whether those are continue to be necessary, whether we can eliminate some of those exemptions. But I also am an advocate for looking at every tool that we have available as a state to help us to spur the economy and to create more jobs. And for me, that means infrastructure investment. That means it's time now for investment in transportation. It's time for investment in expanding broadband. It's time for investment in more public works projects. That's how we're going to really address the economic downturn and get people back to work.
So where does the money for these investments come from?
We have a transportation supplemental revenue package that we put forward 2 years ago that has been for the Senate Transportation Committee, and that supplemental package included not just additional gas tax, to the user fee, as you know, but also some form of carbon tax. And it remains to be seen where consensus will fall in terms of carbon policy, but that's the discussion I'm ready to have for next session.
Do you personally think this would be a good time to raise those taxes?
I believe that the return on investment benefits every citizen in the state of Washington when we're able to make targeted investment and take new revenue and ensure that that then goes to toward building toward the future, spurring our economy, creating jobs. I'll also mention that now is a time when borrowing money, I mean, the interest rates are extremely low. And given that we face a crisis situation, it's not outside the realm of possibility for us to be looking at our borrowing capacity and what investments we might to look at.
Okay, thank you. Craig, do you have anything?
Sure. So, tell me a little bit about what you're thinking when you see the Black Lives Matter and defund police movements going on. Are those realistic goals? Are they worthy of exploring? So, let's start with Ray.
Okay. Let me just add just a quick thing, if you don't, Craig, though, okay, real quick. Made a quick statement that she was going to raise taxes and actually start a carbon tax, which is, again, raising taxes during a time when we have closed down our businesses and putting more burdens on our business groups. That is unacceptable. We simply cannot be putting even additional burdens on them by talking about raising taxes, including a carbon tax, which we haven't even explored at all. I know we need to discuss it, but should not even be part of the discussion. What should be part of our discussion is that we need to raise revenue by opening up our economy to start the machine that was working very well and gave us a $2.4 billion revenue before COVID, and then gave it, and our economy is still doing relatively well. We are poised to get back online. We need to create an environment where businesses can operate right now. To tax them is not going to be business friendly, and that's just not the wise thing to do. Now let's talk a little bit about, your question was about Black Lives Matter.
Right, and the defund the police movements.
Okay. I think, how do I put this without being difficult?
No, go ahead, be difficult.
I'm trying to, let me say it like this. Defunding the police is probably the worst idea that can possibly come up. It is a danger to our businesses. It takes the business to our safety. It puts danger to all kinds of activities. Absolutely outrageous. Defunding the police right now is would be tantamount to opening up our area to incredible horrors, and we simply can't allow that to happen. Right now, because of people defunding the police, we're looking at a 24% increase in homicides. Think about that. 24% increase in homicides in some of our largest, in 50 of our largest cities. And where places have been defunded, where you're looking at Minneapolis, you have murders on the rise. We don't need to look very far to talk about defunding police. Look at what's happened up in Seattle with the talk of defunding the police, which they have done. Again, the murder rate has gone way up. Crime is up. Neighborhoods that used to be very nice. I used to love going up to Seattle, but the very places where I used to walk, it would be dangerous to walk those places now. And we don't have to look very far now, do we? Look down into Portland, where we see where defunding of the police has been talked about and now going on, where we're seeing crime rising. Has anybody been into Portland lately? I've been there within the last just 4 days. Areas boarded up, seeing people lying on the street. Is that what we want? That's not what we want. Not here in my Vancouver, not in this Vancouver. The reforming the police, I agree with 100%. Should we be reformed? There's always places to reform. What can we do? We can increase our training, and that's what we need. Right here in Vancouver, we have what's called the Police Executive Research Forum. They've developed a process where we're looking at, and 10 of their best ideas we're implementing the police are implementing right now. It is a very good thing. We are reforming ourselves, and it's working very well. Also, what we need to do is to look at some of the programs that I have developed. I've developed a program called the NET, the Neighborhood Excellence Team. This is where we utilize the neighborhood. We utilize all sources. We use for employment, for counseling, for housing, for medications, for addiction, for mental health. All of these people come together as one at the very moment of need of somebody that we come across. So it doesn't take months, days, years to get something accomplished. The net has allowed us to actually help somebody within a matter of minutes, get them housing, get them places to stay. These are the things we need to look at. Also, in this part of this talk even more about defunding the police. If we could allow that defunding to happen, violent offenders will be still put out on our streets. We simply can't allow that. Common sense must reign here. And I understand how scary it is. We think that the police are doing horrible things, but that is not the case. We need to have the result of not defunding the police, but of looking at increased training, developing programs like the net, and then getting violent offenders off our streets are going to bring safer streets, a safer response to this crisis situation, and a community gathering around the most vulnerable of our folks. I understand some of the frustrations, but if we need to start thinking level-headed about what's going on and not allow ourselves to fall into the same trap that has happened to Seattle. We see what's going on, how Seattle is dying. We look at Portland, how it's being destroyed. We do not want that for our lovely Vancouver. And we need to only look across the water to see it.
Now, I want to follow up, then we'll get to Annette on that. You said we think police are doing terrible things. That's not the case. Are there any instances where police are doing terrible things?
Are we talking within Vancouver or are we talking nationwide?
Nationwide.
Of course. We're looking, let's look at it like this. We have about 800,000 peace officers in the nation. 800,000. And we're looking at nationwide that each one of those officers will probably be making upwards of 10 or 12 contacts a day. Where you get yourself, you add another zero to it, that's 8 million contacts a day. A day. And we're looking at how many of those officers are involved in situations that that go bad. Let's open it up. We had in 2019, we had 9 black people killed, unarmed black people killed. 9. Nationwide, 9 that were killed, that were unarmed. And of those, we had 6, maybe 7 that they were unarmed. But we found out that they either tried to use the officer's weapon against them, or they tried to run him over with a car, or utilize some other form of weapon that ended up causing him have to use deadly force. And those others that were left over, those 3 other cases that were left over, the officers were prosecuted. So in answer to your question, yes, there are times when officers do wrong, but look at the volume of contacts that we have. It is unreasonable for us to say that is something that is happening overall when you look at the number of contacts that we make, that officers make. It is important for us to try to put this in perspective. And that is what's been lacking in a lot of this discussion, perspective.
Okay, let's move on, Annette.
Thanks, Greg. Well, defunding police does not address the problem. The problem is the disproportionate violence and murder of our people of color by police around the country. And I'll remind you that the legislature does not fund of our local law enforcement organizations, but I want to keep the focus on what it is that we need to address. We need to address systemic racism. That begins with acknowledgement that it exists and a willingness to examine all systems in order to bring about the needed change. And for me, that means the first step is implementing police reforms that are aimed at halting the violence and the deaths that we've seen. I have said that I support adopting the 8 can't wait strategies that are put forward by Campaign Zero across all communities in our state. And these strategies, when implemented in other communities, have been shown to reduce violence by at least upwards of 75%. While strategies are a start, I used to have a boss who would often say, culture eats strategy for lunch. And while we can implement strategies, what we also have to do is work to change the culture of law enforcement. And that requires policies that are aimed at continuous training, are aimed at implementing systems of accountability, are aimed at consequences when actions are taken that don't support the strategies that are in place. So that's what I would propose we focus on as policies in order to begin to acknowledge and address systemic racism.
Has Washington effectively addressed the issue of holding officers accountable?
We have passed legislation, yes, that began to take steps toward that, but I think that we have to continue to look to improve and make additional headway. We have to look at the data and determine whether more steps are needed.
And you would be in favor of that at the legislative level?
Yes.
Ray, would you agree that systemic racism exists?
You know, I really appreciate that. Let me address a little bit of what you said, and then I'll answer that question directly. Number one, you say that there's wanted to defunding the police and stop the murder of Black people. Her implication is that officers are out there murdering Black people. And as I indicated, that is not the case. And those that have been, where cases have happened, where you have like the issue in Scotts, in the area of South Carolina, I believe it was, where the officer ended up killing someone. That was murder, and he ended up getting arrested for it. That is the case. But if you want to make sure that we're looking at here in Vancouver, you want to look here in Clark County. If we're going to put things in place that are going to limit police officers and their ability to investigate, it's going to limit officers and their ability to root out crime as a knee-jerk reaction to what is there, where there is no problem in this area. I say and their question is, do officers being held accountable? Are they being held accountable? The answer is absolutely yes. We have programs that are going on right now where we have an internal affairs that is very vigorous at looking at officers and anything that we do. Every situation, most complaints are looked at by there are programs in place that look very directly at police. The implication that there are no programs is absolutely untrue. And we need to be clear on that so that there's no doubt that this kind of reaction is unacceptable and uncalled for. So we do have accountability. And again, as I've said it before, training is always excellent. We need to have more training and we need to increase it, especially when it comes to dealing with our crisis situations involving our people of color. We have crisis situations involving mental illness. We have crisis situations involving our children. Officers need to be trained in that. And officers are being trained that way. Now, let me address this issue about systemic racism. I think it's important because the implication was that police are systemically racist. I want to make it categorically clear that that is not true whatsoever. I am ashamed to hear such statements like that.
Are those necessarily the same thing?
I'm sorry, what was your question, sir? I didn't hear it correctly.
The systemic racism, I don't think it necessarily said anything specific about police. I mean,
Okay.
that could be in housing programs or in state government or.
Okay, well, I agree with you, and thank you for that. That kind of leads to what I'm going to say here. First of all, we need to know what systemic racism is. Now, we know that systemic racism, it began when conservative Black people were getting elected into office. That's during the Reconstruction period. Conservative Black people were getting elected into office. So progressive politicians of the time, at that time, they developed stuff called the poll taxes and Jim Crow laws. These were systemic things placed in the way to stop Black people from moving up to actually running for office or moving into the political spectrum after the Civil War. And also there was land ownership. We all know that recently, even here in Oregon and Washington, it was illegal at one point for Black people to own land. That is systemic. That's systemic to prevent Black people from moving up. One of the things that we also know that when we have systemic racism, this is what happens. One of the cases where we had were, we look at Thomas, I believe, when he was running for office. Yes, when Clarence Thomas was running for office, he was falsely accused, of some kind of sexual issues. He was falsely accused. He argued that that was absolutely not true, what was going on, that he did not do anything wrong, and he stood there in front of the Judiciary Committee, which was headed at one time by Joe Biden, and he was very upset that he was being railroaded. And I just want to read you a little bit what he said about that.
Well, let's say, I think the question is, does it still exist now?
I think it does exist.
Something
Absolutely.
the legislature should address.
I think getting to the question directly, it does exist. And I've experienced it even during this time that we've been working and running for this office. Systemic racism does exist. And it's by way of people going after person, just like they did Clarence Thomas, when they went after him, and he said, as a Black American, as far as I am concerned, it is high-tech lynching for uppity Blacks who in any way deem to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. When people bring up issues that are untrue and it is used to stop Black people from moving up.
Is there something the legislature should do to address that?
It is difficult for the legislature to legislate against racism. That's almost impossible. We cannot legislate what's in someone's heart, but we can investigate frivolous accusations and place people under arrest for proven malicious bias. That we can do. We can do that. And if we really care about ending racism, we can start looking very clearly at trying to end obvious systemic racism, especially when it comes to our elected offices. We need to look places where we know that there's been systemic racism, where we're looking at, like, some of our office right now. There are no Black people no Black persons in the Senate right now, not one, and hasn't been since the 90s. It's only been because when you start running as a conservative, you get a number of different people attacking you systemically. So can the legislature do something about it? We can enforce the laws against racial bias. We can enforce the laws against people that are maliciously attacking folks for no reason. We need to probably reform some of the laws when people come up with lies and libelous states when it comes to people trying to move up. Kind of things the legislature could address. But as far as any other techniques that are used, you cannot legislate against somebody's racism that is deep in their heart.
Let's say, Craig, did you have another?
Sure. So I'm just curious.
I want to share a moment, since I didn't get an opportunity to
Go ahead.
speak and address some of what my opponents shared. Racial inequality touches every sector in our state. And I'm going to give an example. As a chair of the Senate Health Care Committee, I'm distinctly aware of the disparities that exist in healthcare, particularly the recent disparities that we've seen laid bare by COVID. And just 2 weeks ago, I held a special interim Senate Healthcare Committee where we examined some of the data that we're seeing and the research that's increasingly showing that racial and ethnic minorities are disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus. And so that's one example where we can then look at policy to help to begin to address those root causes, that we can hopefully improve that population's health over the long run. So
give me one example of what kind of legislative policy could address that.
Well, we know that some of the root causes are the fact that healthcare coverage is more difficult for people of color to obtain. Healthcare access is more difficult. There are issues around trust and with providers. We need to work to grow a larger workforce that is more diverse, so that culturally competent care is available to our communities of color. Those are just some of the off the top of my examples.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Craig.
Name some political figures you admire and why. Senator Cleveland, you want to start with that?
Sure. I admire U.S. Senator Patty Murray greatly. As you know, I worked for her and began working for her when she was first elected to the U.S. Senate. She is someone that I consider to be a mentor and someone who today is the exact same person she was when she entered the U.S. Senate in 1992. And she's a strong woman and someone who, like me, doesn't necessarily seek the spotlight, isn't necessarily comfortable in the hot glare lights, but wants to do the right thing and get work done.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
You know, there's a couple. I think I really appreciate Senator Scott on the East Coast there. He is an outstanding man. He has developed programs and solutions that actually address this issue of systemic racism, where he actually is bringing in economic zones within some of our worst areas that are where people have been held down economically. He's bringing in ideas and solutions that inspire young people, especially young Black people, to move forward and move ahead and become entrepreneurs. He is helping to develop different areas, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. The same, developing our areas, developing solutions that work right within the 49th, not so much way outside somewhere else, but right here in the 49th. So I would say Senator Scott is definitely one of my top ones. Probably my second would be Representative, because she has done a fantastic job of remembering where she came from. She's from this area. She remembered the people of Southwest Washington. That's really fantastic. I think that's where we need to keep in mind. What is good for the 49th? What is good for Southwest Washington? That's where we have to focus. And that's where I think we've lost that focus, but I believe we can bring it back.
Along those lines, I want to follow up. Do you support the nominees from your party for president and for governor? I'll start with Annette.
Yes.
Mr. Reynolds?
Okay, you want me to go first?
Annette said yes.
I
Oh,
just
okay, Okay,
Yeah.
whatever works. I'm good with that.
I know it
So
was
Ray,
was
do
it
you
a political
support
answer?
the nominees from your party for governor and president?
Okay, you're back to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it keeps cutting in and out.
I know. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, do I accept the nominees from my party for president and for governor?
Do you support them?
Well, the answer to that question has to be yes, I support them. I support and it's what they stand for. I've looked at some of the things they're doing, and I'm very pleased with it. Now, does that mean I accept all of their activities? Absolutely not. Again, I believe in independent thinking and independently. And those same virtues that I bring into that, I think independently. So although I agree with some of the things that they say and some of the things that they do, I will independently. And I will not think strictly down party lines. I absolutely will not. I will be looking at how we can best make the Vancouver area, the 49th district specifically, better. And what makes the 49th better will make me happy and how we'll do it. So if what they do does not support the 49th, then no, I will not support it. But if it does, then I will. And I think that's a pretty simple answer.
I'm going to follow up with that regarding independent thinking. And on your website, you mentioned the issue of medical freedom. What exactly do you mean by that? How does that apply to specific policy?
Well, when I say medical freedom, we need to get right back down to what is critical. What is that? What is going to affect our families, the families here in Vancouver? The families in Vancouver need to have the right to decide what's best for their families. We do not need to have the government coming in deciding that it is going to be the controller of a family and making decisions that should be made only by the family. That's what I mean by medical freedom, that those families, they get to decide what is best for their families. Of course, if that's based upon good science, good doctor recommendations, based upon what they feel is but to have the government come in and begin to take over the family and to decide what must be done inside that family and take away that freedom. 100%.
So would you have opposed the new law regarding exemptions for childhood vaccinations?
I haven't really researched that topic like to the degree that I need to make a real definitive answer on that. I would like to look at it and find out a little bit more information about it. I don't have a lot of it on its surface, and just prima facie, I would say that there's something needs to be done, that we need to remember that the family should be decided first, and that we should look directly at what is good for our families, not so much what the government wants.
Would you have opposed the new law raising the age of purchase for tobacco and vaping products?
Hey, you broke up on my end.
Oh, sorry about that. There's a relatively new law that raised the age of purchase for tobacco and vaping products. Yes. Would you have supported that bill or opposed it?
If you're looking for a specific answer to that, I would have supported that.
Okay.
And other products have done to these kids. So yeah, I would have opposed that.
And then Annette, I believe you supported both of those.
Yes, and actually, I'd like to address the vaccine issue that you mentioned and remind you that while it's hard to remember 2 years ago, just a short 2 years ago, last year actually, we experienced measles outbreak in this state. Sure. That was centered.
It seems so long ago.
It does seem so long ago, but it was centered here.
Unbelievable. 2 years.
That I worked swiftly to address, put forward legislation to better ensure that we could continue to maintain or reach again community immunity levels. And I partnered with my colleague in the 17th, Representative Paul Harris, on that issue. It was his bill that ultimately passed, and it was his bill that I strongly spoke to on the Senate floor. And I'm pleased that we were able to pass that bill and address that public health crisis. We now have, as you know, a public health crisis that we are navigating worldwide. And the science there has been very clear about what we need to do as individuals to help stop the spread, prevent the spread of the virus. It's easy. It's to wear a mask. It's socially distance. It's limit large gatherings. And yet I've been very disappointed to see on pictures on Facebook of my opponent without a mask attending large gatherings, large Republican candidate events here in Clark County. And I think that that is a concern that each one of the voters here in the 49th should look at and consider.
Ray, is that accurate? Have you attended events without a mask?
That's interesting to say. There were some events that I went to, and when I went to those events, I maintained what we call social distancing. And also I was asked to be there to actually sing and talk at those events. So at those times I was definitely not masked when I'm singing and also to talking. The issue. When we look at where we have the results, where we know that the disease itself, 99% of the people that even catch the disease recover, and that's younger people. And older people, there's what I understand, but 94%. That does not mean that we don't just take precautions. We do. We take all the precautions. We social distance when we can. We wear a mask when we must. But the issue has to be what is really best for the persons at the time.
And so you decide that, not the public health experts. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing? As a police officer,
I think if you don't mind, I'd like to finish my statement.
Pertain to you and what?
No, I think you need to let me finish what I'm saying, Senator.
Please go right ahead.
Okay, I will not interrupt you if you don't interrupt me. I think it's important that we
I want to understand.
are allowed.
Okay, go ahead, Ray.
Okay, let me try it one more time. It is critical that we as a society, especially down here in Vancouver, that we allow people the freedom, right, to gather and exercise their First Amendment rights. That is a critical thing. We have not stood in the way of the protesters that have been coming out and protesting without masks, without social distancing. There's not been hardly any words brought about that. However, there have been words brought about when we have Republicans gather or people that want to exercise their First Amendment rights. I believe that we cannot and must not limit the First Amendment rights of our citizens at all. I am very clear on this, and I want to be clear for everybody to know. First Amendment to gather and to peacefully exercise those rights must not be infringed. If we start to infringe on those rights for whatever reason, then that is unacceptable, and I will not tolerate it. I took an oath to never violate those constitutional rights, to uphold them, and I will definitely do that. It is.
Yeah, but does that prevent us from moving forward in the pandemic?
Does wearing the mask or not? I'm not sure.
Not wearing a mask. It seems like we're kind of treading water on the number of infections.
I think what we're looking at is whether we're wearing a mask or not, whether it's a issue of compliance or whether it's an issue of actually being helpful. I think we got some results back where it says that we have social distancing and wearing the mask was to prevent the spread of the disease because of droplets, because we felt that those droplets can be, and that's why we wear a mask. And also but we found out later, just throughout the CDC, that now that we know that it is a aerosol. And aerosol means that it can be 30 feet out from where we're at. So it means that an aerosol means that those very super small molecules, very simple small viruses will go through the mask.
So you don't think wearing a mask even helps at all?
I won't make that definitive. That's not true. In some cases it does help. But what I will say, in the vast area that we're looking at, that mask, as it's even written on the mask, is no real protection as far as their statement about the ability of the mask to stop COVID.
Okay.
It does not stop COVID. And then I think that we should be cognizant of what those people who make the masks are. Let me say this one thing too.
Well, let me move on to Annette. You wanted to respond?
Oh,
Okay.
no, I'm very confused by the contradictions in my opponent's positions. And I'll share that Clark County just this weekend has seen another 157 new coronavirus infections. And the personal decision to not follow the land that the governor's put in place currently endangers lives. End of story.
Ray, would you agree that that endangers lives?
I would not. I would say that we're looking at people that when we go out to a location, and if people wear masks or don't wear masks, I'm saying that we're looking at. I can give a better example. Look at on the East Coast, where people have been wearing masks. They've been also shuttered into their residences, finding that those same people have just about the same infection rates as areas that didn't, or that didn't shutter, that didn't have all those masks. I disagree with the senator. I disagree with her in that we need to look at how we respond to our doctors and how we respond to people and how we look at some of the results, some of the scientific stuff that is out there, we must not allow ourselves to fall into the trap of what we have to be like lemmings, following after things that have no good scientific basis.
Okay, well, tell me this. Washington has had relatively strict restrictions regarding the shutdown en masse, and Washington is in the bottom 10 among states per capita in both infections and deaths. You don't think there's any correlation between those?
I don't know if there's been any studies, Greg, about whether or not there's a correlation there. Anything like that would be speculation on my part. I would like to see if there is a scientific study that has been out there and one that has been that you can duplicate. I would like to see it. I would like to see a study like that. That's a very good question. Is there a correlation between it? I don't think we can say. And I think anyone who makes a comment that there is a correlation would be doing so without any scientific background or any scientific backing.
And that you've been in public health. Do you believe there is a correlation?
I believe that our CDC, our public experts in this state have laid out the steps that we need to take as individuals to keep one another safe. It's clear what guidelines we need to follow, and it's a matter of life and death. And it concerns me greatly, and I do feel passionate about this, given that I am chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee. Passionate about being an example to others as a leader, and working to ensure that everyone's clear about the guidelines and everyone follows them, so that as a state, we can continue to move forward in reopening our economy and getting people back to work.
Okay. Thank you. Craig, did you have anything else?
No, I think I'm good, Greg. Thank you.
Okay.
It's a bit interesting.
Let's go ahead and move along. Actually, there are a lot of things we could get to, but we should probably wrap this up. Take just a couple of minutes, give us your final pitch for why voters should support you. Feel free to mention any notable endorsements you would like, and we'll start with Ray.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the spirited debate. It was wonderful. And I want to thank you for this opportunity. I certainly believe that Southwest Washington is the greatest place to live. I have lived here for 35 years. I came here and I've raised my kids here. I believe a healthy economy is the quickest way to lift people out of poverty. We must get our economy moving again. With the emergency equipment that we need easily met at our hospitals right now. Our hospitals are doing well. They are at capacity. They can't handle anything that comes up if we have a spike. I believe we can safely open up right now. With the economic uncertainty, more people are finding themselves unhoused. And I see this every day when I'm working. More and more people on the street, more and more people suffering, more and more people losing their businesses. I believe it is a callous act for us to ignore this, and we must not ignore it anymore. I have a long history of helping many of these people directly. With my NET program that I've developed, it has been an outstanding boon to the area. We have actually found jobs, housing, mental health counseling. We've found people for addiction counseling, and we've worked it with our area residents and area businesses and area nonprofits in a very cohesive way of helping here in the 49th. My whole attitude is towards the 49th and helping right here. I appreciate what's going on in the rest of the state, but the most important program is right here in the 49th. I believe right now safety is what encourages businesses to invest in a town and people to move here, growing the tax base and creating a thriving community. I believe that people have a right to decide for themselves the kind of healthcare and education. And with remote education right now, we can realize, matter of fact, we can reimagine education services. And we can improve on our Wi-Fi access for students as well as the deaf community. Right now, I am the right person for such a time as this. With racial tension and police uncertainty, I am the most qualified to bridge this gap and to be making legislation decisions on these issues. I can handle solutions for inequities in our justice system and ensure justice for all. That's what's important.
Great.
Now that I am also the most qualified to be making laws concerning our environment, especially the only candidate with a degree in water resources and biology, and I have a 12-year career dealing with environmental issues. I believe it's time that we actually stop talking about systemic racism, that we begin to actually do something about it. And I believe it's time for us to recognize here in Clark County, especially in 49, that we have an opportunity to keep a good police force, to keep a good economy, to bring back great schools. I believe that's the opportunity right now. And I hope to have your voters join me and send me to the Washington State Senate, where I can carry out these things that I've talked to you about. So I want you to vote Rey Reynolds, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Rey. And Annette?
Thank you, Greg. First of all, I'm marveling at the fact that we've just apparently gotten through an entire editorial board meeting together without talking about the I-5 bridge.
That was on my list.
I'll look forward to talking with you about that in the future.
Okay.
But I'll just close by sharing I am a very hardworking legislator and one who's been effective. I know this community well. I know that the principles and the values that I hold accurately reflect this district. I want to share that I'm able to work across the aisle in order to solve problems and help our state lead on issues such as healthcare, on reproductive rights, on equal pay. And I don't hesitate to take stances in opposition to my caucus when it's the right thing to do for this community. Most importantly, as I said at the outset, I have the experience that we need right now to continue to respond to the pandemic, help our businesses get back on their feet, help get people back to work. One other fact that bears mentioning, and I want to point out to you, is this. Of the 5 senators in Olympia currently elected to represent various different parts of Clark County, there are 4 Republicans and there's 1 Democrat. I'm the lone voice for Clark County in the Senate Democratic Majority Caucus. And our community and our county doesn't need to add a 5th voice to the Senate's Minority Caucus. We need to maintain the 1 voice that we have in the Senate Democratic Caucus in the majority that decides the agenda, the bills that we're going to bring to the floor and vote on, and what will be funded in the budget. I'll conclude by sharing that I was reflecting back recently on when I was first elected in 2012, and a journalist at the time asked me, what is it that you want to be remembered for? And I said, I want to be remembered for being quietly effective. I don't enjoy the spotlight. Just want to get the work done. I want to get the work done well for citizens of this district and this state. I'll share that I have received broad support and endorsements from the WEA, firefighters, nurses, Sierra Club, Planned Parenthood, the Association of Washington Business, the Building Industry Association, the Children's Campaign Fund, the Washington Housing Action Fund, among others. I think that reflects the kind of legislator that I am, the fact that I do work broadly across the aisle to build consensus and solve problems with policy that's going to best serve this state. So I'd be humbled to once again receive your endorsement. I ask for your support. I ask for your endorsement to allow me to return to Olympia, continue quietly working for you and for this district.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.